Well, we have a really special panel for today. As this was our last meeting before Transit Equity Day, I wanted to spotlight another group who has done an immense Transit Equity Day project from 2020. You may have seen them around, and they've been really instrumental, and I've also been a huge part of this. But I wanted to present Morgan Jacobus and Carden Wyckoff, two board members from my organization, the MARTA Army in Atlanta, Georgia. And they're going to be presenting on the project that we did back in 2020 known as Operation Bus Stop Census. So Morgan, Carden, take it away.
Thank you, Bakari. Let me just take a moment to share my screen. We'll get started. Can y'all see the who is MARTA Army on the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. We'll start off with an introduction of the organization MARTA Army, and then kind of go into an introduction of the presenters. So MARTA Army is a nonprofit that was founded in 2014. It's a volunteer-led 501c3, and our mission is to empower local residents to improve the transit ridership experience in their own neighborhood. We've had a variety of different operations that we've done over the years, beginning with Operation Clean Stop, where the organization raised money for trash cans in the East Point neighborhood in Atlanta. We were there when the I-85 bridge collapsed to provide support for new riders, being able to direct them to the right place to get on their way during the morning commute. And then most recently, we've done the Operation Bus Stop Census, which we're going to talk about today, and another operation called Feed an Operator, where we delivered meals to furloughed transit operators in the metro Atlanta area. So we're very much a small organization. We're tactical, and we like to get things done. Just a little bit about us. I'll introduce myself and let Carden introduce herself as well. So my name is Morgan Jacobus. I am a MARTA Army board member. Been on the board since 2020. I led the Operation Bus Stop Census project, and I currently live in Chicago. I moved in 2021. So I've kind of been supporting MARTA Army from afar for the past year or so.
And thanks, Morgan. I'm Carden. I'm also a MARTA Army board member, been with the organization a couple of years. I'm a disability advocate and a CPA-CC, which is a certified accessibility consultant. I'm a wheelchair user, so I provide the disability lens into our transit experience, and I'm a avid transit rider. The picture of me is at one of our MARTA bus stops.
Perfect. Thank you, Carden. So before we get into the presentation, I wanted to have a little bit of an icebreaker, have some interactive time. So we want to get to know y'all and know a little bit about transit in your area. So if you have the ability in the chat, we have some questions for the answer. So the first question is, what is your name? I see that's on the Zoom already, so probably don't need to answer that one. But what city or town / neighborhood are you joining from? And then the following questions are kind of to do with what we're going to talk about today. So what % of bus stops have a shelter in your city? What % of riders in your city wait for the bus stop, wait for the bus at a stop with a grass boarding area? And the last one is, are most of the bus stops in your city located near a safe crossing? And if for any of those, if you don't know the answer, I don't know is a valid response as well. So you can either put that in the chat, or you can unmute and say your answers to those questions.
My name is Jane English. I work for NAACP National, or we say NAACP National. I happen to live in Washington, D.C. in the Southwest waterfront neighborhood. So pretty much the percentage of bus stops in the city that have in the district rather, that have shelters are probably 100%. If not, it's getting close to that. There's been a big demand here for a long time. Percentage of riders that wait for a bus at a stop with the grass boarding area, that I don't know. I doubt if there's very many of those anymore, but there could be further out. Are bus stops in your city located near a safe crossing? All of them are located near a safe crossing. One of the issues we're having is that the bus stops that are at the metro, where there's these metro hubs, or WMATA, we call it, Washington area metro, WMATA stations. We've been having some real serious safety issues, both at the stops themselves with violence, very serious violence. People are taking their beefs to the metro stations and sometimes up on the platforms as well. But also even on the buses themselves, we've had some safety issues, very serious safety issues. So the bus stops themselves are a microcosm of the experience of violence and safety issues we're faced in the city, primarily perpetuated by youth who have been bottled up throughout the pandemic with very few services or activities, without making any excuses for them. But we've got to deal with it, period.
Okay. Thank you for sharing and answering. I see, Sheila, you're at Fort Wayne, Indiana. Thank you for joining. Do you know any of the questions for 3 through 5 in terms of the percent of stops at the shelter, percent of riders who wait at a stop of address boarding area, and are most of the bus stops located near a safe crossing?
Sheila, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. My name is Sheila Curry Campbell. Yes, I'm out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're located in Allen County. We're in the northeast corner, Indiana, Ohio line. We do not have mass transit. We have City Link, which is our bus. It's 30 minutes to a transfer and then another 30 minutes probably to your destination. So for safe places, most of the transit kind of works like they have 2 main stops where you would transfer at, and then there's bus routes along the streets. Once you get outside of the main bus route, most jobs, Walmart, Myers, different places, is another 30-minute walk. So we do have a problem with our transit, and that extra 30 minutes to get to your final guest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. I see Marie, Bethesda, Maryland, in the DC area. It says 3 and 4, not sure. And then number 5 in my area, I would say yes, 90% of them. Thank you. Thank you, Marie, for responding. So the reason we just want to get to know where everyone is from. It seems like we cover a good amount of the East Coast and Midwest. But also just to highlight, just if you said, I don't know about any of these questions, you're kind of in the same boat that we were back in 2019 when we hosted a book club on Better Buses, Better Cities by Stephen Higashida. And in this book, when we were reading it, it said that if you want to make change in your bus system, you got to understand how transit works and what is happening. You have to understand the power structures behind it. And for us at the book club, we wanted to focus in on bus stops because that was something in Atlanta that's kind of a problem, at least that we had experienced. There was a lot of bus stops that were in really bad conditions. But when we thought about what we know about bus stops, we realized that we know very little in terms of how many bus stops had a shelter, or how many bus stops had actually a paved boarding area. What are some of the issues that riders are actually experiencing, and who is responsible for that? So to address this knowledge gap, we started Operation Bus Stop Census. It was launched on Transit Equity Day in 2020. And we wanted to model after the US Census, which was happening that same year. We wanted to crowdsource as much information on these stops so we would become an expert on them. We would know what are kind of the key issues that are facing bus riders in Atlanta, and what can be done to prioritize and to prioritize those improvements with those entities that are responsible for implementing them. So we launched it February 4th, 2020. We had the goal of surveying 2,500 stops by December 31st. And what will follow is a presentation of what the operation was, the results from it, our recommendations, and a few of the outcomes that we've seen so far. And for those who are on the call now, this is probably not we probably don't need to go too much into this, but when we started it, the question was, why bus stops? Why spend so much time studying them? And for us, we know that bus stops are amazing. They're connection points to all kinds of different opportunities, from childcare to jobs, grocery stores, you name it. They unlock potential of opportunity just by walking to them and stepping on the bus. They're, I think, a crucial piece of infrastructure that sustains physical, social, mental, and economic health of urbanized and even rural areas. And they were already playing a significant role in Metro Atlanta, where they support nearly half of all transit trips on MARTA. But not only do they connect us to different destinations, they must also fulfill the difficult task of meeting the needs of the greatest extent of possible riders. That includes teenagers, older riders, wheelchair users, people with strollers, out-of-town visitors. And how our bus stops are designed can welcome or exclude these riders. And so we want to collect data on bus stops to allow us to see how well they are serving these groups of riders as they conduct their everyday travel. So I'll stop there with the importance of bus stops and pass it off to Carden, who's going to talk about kind of how the operation worked.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. And so the way that we did this was by creating a survey. And so in order to collect information about the bus stops, we created a form that had various questions on it. And we also created an interactive map with all of the bus stops on it. And so the way that a user would do it is that they would click on any one of the bus stops, and it would link them to the survey. And we programmed the survey so that it already auto-filled in the bus stop ID and the location, so the cross street and the street that it was on. Sometimes there were other various factors that MARTA gave us that we already pre-filled in. So a user would go through a series of questions, and some of those questions would be like, does it have a crossing? Does it have a shelter? Do you feel safe? Does it have lighting? And then we would ask the user the surveyor to take a screenshot of, and at the time this was done during 2020, the height of the pandemic. So a lot of the surveys were done remotely. So we used Google Street View. So we asked them to take a screenshot of the bus stop and kind of the surrounding area. But if they were doing it in person, just take a picture with your phone and upload it into the form. And to anonymize the data, we made sure that we made sure that the email address was removed and any other personal identifiable information. So next slide. And then we rewarded those that were surveying so that they felt incentivized to it. So we gave them t-shirts, umbrellas, etc., based on how many surveys that they did. So again, it was a checklist. And then this is an example of a screenshot that we encouraged riders to capture. So in this case, it's a very clear view of there's a signpost, the MARTA signpost. There's a bench here, a nice trash can. There's the loading zone. We see that there's a grass strip where the crosswalk or where the sidewalk is, and there's some bus information. And so every one of these was captured. The majority of them were captured in the surveys, and so gave us a really great view into the state of the bus stops. All right, next slide. And the way that we encourage the public to get involved, we did these survey Saturdays. So again, just think 2020, we couldn't do these in person, which was the initial goal. or primarily do them in person just due to COVID rules. So we did them virtually. So we had these survey Saturdays where we would do a couple hours doing surveys, and it was just a community bonding time. If people, Bakari, my hair was wild that 2020 for you, right? For those that felt comfortable going outside, we encouraged them to mask up, and we did some of the surveys in very small groups, and they would walk down a bus route and collect surveys in person. And then weekly, we posted the results and how many bus stops that we had completed. So our goal was to do 30% of the bus stops, and we far exceeded that. We got to 50% on over the year timeline that we had the survey open. We had 50% done by July, and then towards the end of the year, we had over 100% of the goal. So this translates to over 2,500 stops, which is pretty remarkable.
And what Cardin have not mentioned is that she was the MVP of the survey, and she surveyed of that 3,200, about 1,000 of them. I think a little bit more than that, which is a substantial achievement, and really boosted the amount of data that we had. So kudos to Cardin.
Thank you. There wasn't much to do. I couldn't really go out and do things. So I was like, well, why don't I just survey all day? So let's focus in on some of the findings from the bus stop census. And again, it was just a very community-centric event. We had 293 individual surveyors. We accomplished over 3,200 stops, which was 25% in each jurisdiction. So MARTA is very large. We span multiple different counties and cities. And so in each jurisdiction, at least 25% of the bus stops were surveyed in each. So that showed that it was a diverse and equitable. We weren't just focusing on one particular area of the service route. And in addition, 12 of the bus routes had over 85% of the stops surveyed. At the time of the pandemic was happening, MARTA decided to cut back on their bus routes down to just the bare minimum as possible, the high ridership routes. And so we did make an executive decision to switch the surveys to primarily focus on those high ridership routes. And that also gives us a better view into how the bus stops are in the current condition based on with high ridership and high volume. Okay, next slide. And so the way that we identified the metrics that you'll see in many of the slides going forward, we broke them down into % of stops and % of ridership. So the % of stops is indicated in blue, and then % of ridership is in yellow. And so the difference between these two metrics, percentage of stops is looking at how many stops out of all the surveyed stops had a particular amenity. And then % of ridership is how many riders out of the total weekly riders are served by bus stops with a particular amenity. Okey-doke, next slide. So to break down the survey, we had various categories. So starting out with seating. So obviously seating, pretty self-explanatory. Does it have a bench and or a type of seat for someone to rest and wait for the bus stop? Next slide. And so when we look at those results, 19% of our bus stops had seating. And this is pretty significant in that percentage of riders, 41% of the bus stops that ride MARTA, our bus stops, only 19% of those seats, 19% of those bus stops have seats. And so we noticed that there's a really huge gap here, that there's definitely we need to have more seating available because we have a lot of bus stops that don't have seating, and 81% do not have seating. And so we took various pictures of different types of seating at MARTA. There's a MARTA shelter. There's which we see in the number 1. So that's that, the covered area with the bench and then a space for a wheelchair. And then number 2 is just a standard MARTA bench. There's no shelter or shade coverage per se. And then number 3 is a semi seat. So there's 2 seats on the MARTA pole. So there's various different types of seating. And the reason we have these 3 different options is because different jurisdictions will also purchase and put in various seating. So that's why it's pretty variable. And then we have some seats that we saw, which, people would create take a paint bucket and turn it over like one of those Home Depot buckets and create a seat, or someone found a chair and decided to put it at. So those aren't necessarily MARTA provided or jurisdiction provided. It's just someone did it in the community. So that's what we're seeing on the next slide. Yeah, with all these different kinds of seating options. There's that bucket, there's a random bench, there's a wooden chair, etc. Those are kind of makeshift seating, as I was talking about, versus jurisdiction provided seating. And so we saw that there's just a lot of this kind of makeshift seating, and it was an amenity that we definitely need to improve on. Okay.
I'm going to add one thing back in this slide. We found that the types of seating is not very diverse. In fact, most of the seating that was provided by MARTA, at least, was found with the shelter. So there was, to us, like an opportunity to diversify and add more benches, semi-seats, more of the low-cost options that don't have to maybe necessarily come with a shelter. Because the threshold to get a shelter in terms of the ridership or what criteria MARTA uses, it can be high for certain stops. So it'd be good to be able to diversify and add more of the benches and semi-seats that don't require the ability to meet the ridership and other criteria.
And Marie Lewis, yes, the survey questions were the same for every respondent. It wasn't a dynamic form by any means, because we wanted to eliminate any possibility of bias or whatnot. Okay, so the next category was shelters. And so if you've spent any time around Atlanta, these shelters have a canopy, they have seating, they usually have wayfinding maps, and a trash can and some lighting. And these are provided either by MARTA or a local jurisdiction. And so going into the data on this, as Morgan alluded to, the shelters are very costly. And so this is not the number 1 amenity that we see. It's low. So only about 12% of bus stops have a shelter, whereas 88% do not have a shelter. And high ridership at these bus stops. So 30% that have 36% of riders ride a stop that have a shelter, whereas 64% of riders ride a stop that don't have a shelter. So definitely something that we want to explore more as well. So not having shelter, if you've ever been to Atlanta, there's really big storms, like rainstorms. Thankfully, they pass pretty quickly, but it also gets very hot in the summertime. So we definitely get a lot of the elements. And additionally, with shelters, though MARTA may provide a shelter, it doesn't necessarily mean that getting to the shelter is accessible. So for me as a wheelchair user, this poses a big challenge, because you may have a really nice shelter, but I have no means of safely getting to that shelter and using that amenity, or the bus stop for that matter. So, and the issue with that is just the difference in who owns what part of the right of way. So MARTA owns the area right in front of the bus stop. So, which is why they are responsible for putting that concrete slab and maybe the, the little sidewalk boarding area right in front of the shelter. However, it's the jurisdiction's responsibility, so the city or the county, to then actually build the sidewalk leading up to the bus stop. And so what we see is, what we found in our data was that 39 shelters had no sidewalk.
This was definitely a good example of uncovering a problem that bus riders face that's a result of a power structure between MARTA and the local jurisdiction that's responsible for the right-of-way outside of the bus stop boarding area. And we kind of talked about it as a responsibility gap where the MARTA can provide it, but the local jurisdiction, in this case, a lot of times it was the unincorporated county, has to go in and provide the actual sidewalks needed to go in place. So this was very eye-opening for us in terms of some of the very unique problems that bus riders are facing in the Metroland area.
Yeah, exactly. So the next category, wayfinding. So with wayfinding, you want to know when you get off the stop, where are you going, or even when you're boarding, what routes does it serve, maybe a map. A schedule is also very nice, real-time information, and if you have an issue, be able to contact customer service. And so what we're seeing on that picture of MARTA is you have the MARTA signpost, the typical logo and icon bus stop, and then on the left-hand side, you see the routes served and which direction that they're going. So that's helpful information for a rider. And so what we found, obviously, there's a major gap in wayfinding. And thankfully, though, one of the outcomes that's happening with MARTA from the bus stop census is they're redoing and adding wayfinding at their bus stops. And so this data is something that we are working to solve for, and it's being rolled out right now. So as of when we conducted this survey, only 9% of bus stops had route info and customer service information. Sorry, that was all that wayfinding information. Some of the routes, which was only 4%, had this wayfinding information. And then a significant lack of wayfinding information was 80% of the bus stops, which was basically just the MARTA signpost and the telephone number. So there was no indication that which bus stops or bus routes that it served and in which direction it was going. So you see the various pictures here, one with some route information, that's kind of a low post. Then you have the route information on the post, and then you kind of have this makeshift route information, which was part of one of our previous operations, which was Operation Timely Trip, and we posted route information to assist with wayfinding. So again, another issue with MARTA is just not having reliable wayfinding information, but thankfully this is changing. I believe, if I'm not correct, Morgan and Bakari, the new route signs are, the new MARTA signposts are being implemented all over the jurisdiction. Will be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okie doke. And then a little bit next, the next information about wayfinding is from an accessibility lens. For me specifically, is whether or not information is located at eye level. And as a wheelchair user, it can be very difficult if font is very tiny and a sign is up really high. And what we found, and also legibility, and whether or not there's good contrast between the small font, those are all different accessibility criteria. So what we found is that the wayfinding information that MARTA provides at our shelters is that the font is really tiny and it has low contrast. And so it makes it very difficult for anyone to use to get information out of this. It's difficult to read. And so less than 10% of the stops with wayfinding were not located at the eye level of a wheelchair user. So that is a pretty easy fix for MARTA in terms of an outcome. They just have to, move the signs down a little bit lower. All right, so the next category was around the boarding area. So the boarding area is the space from the curb to the sidewalk and any other dimension that passengers have to travel to board or alight the bus. And so as we know, as transit users, that good boarding areas make getting on and off easy and accessible. All right, next slide. So we evaluated the surface of the boarding area. And so we broke down the categories into, is the boarding area made of concrete? Is it grass or dirt? Is it asphalt? Or does it use brick pavers? And so what we found is 68% of our bus stops are on concrete sidewalk, 27% is on grass or dirt, 1% is on asphalt, and then 3% brick pavers. So I think one good thing out of this is that, though it may seem that a lot of our bus stops are kind of rogue and there's no accessibility to get to it, 68% of the bus stops are on a concrete sidewalk, which serves 83% of our riders. Okie doke. And then the next thing we looked at are sidewalks. So when sidewalks are properly built and maintained, they provide that accessible path to the bus stop. And so we looked at whether or not the paved sidewalk to the boarding area of the bus stop exists. And what we saw is 75% of bus stops, of the ones that we surveyed, had a sidewalk, which is good because it serves 89% of riders, and 25% didn't have a sidewalk. But just to point out that just because there is a sidewalk doesn't mean that it's necessarily accessible, because 75% of the stops with a sidewalk, 25% reported an obstruction. So whether that be a telephone pole in the way, a lot of times in the MARTA jurisdiction, our sidewalks are narrow. They're, the standard 4 feet, and there's power supplies, there's all kinds of things in the way, maybe a trash can, signposts, all kinds of utilities that block the sidewalk, but also the sidewalk could be totally crumbled and not well maintained. We definitely have a big issue in Atlanta in regards to quality of our sidewalks. All right, and then Morgan, I think you're going to the report card.
Yes.
Okay, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Carden. That was a really thorough review of just a select few of the topics we covered. There's a little bit more, but for sake of time, we left a few out. But you can find all of the results for that in the actual report, which we'll link towards the end. But as part of this initiative, we wanted to create a report card for bus stops, because everyone loves a good report card. It's easy to understand what it means. A being a good score, F being a failing score. And we decided to use the data that we collected from the bus stop census to create a report card for bus stops. So how it worked was we kind of based it off of the American Societies of Civil Engineers infrastructure grading system. They're the organization that every 4 years will come out and say, America's roads have a grade B this year, or the airports have a grade C. We wanted to do something that was more granular for bus stops so that people could get understanding of how well we're doing. So we used the information that we collected and kind of assigned them a weight out of 100 points. So here we see we included boarding area, seating, shelter, sidewalks and crosswalks, as well as wayfinding information and trash cans into the overall weighted categories of the grade for the stop. And we assigned weights. We worked with MARTA and a few other stakeholders to understand what the weighting should be. And this is kind of how it came about, was crosswalks and safe crossing, and safe and accessible crossings being high on the list, as well as the boarding area and sidewalks. If you need to be able to get to the stop to enjoy any of the amenities that come next, which is why seating, shelter, trash can, and wayfinding are a little bit less weighted on the spectrum. In terms of the actual grades, so we just had grades from A to F. A stop being in excellent condition. It's very accessible. It's near a safe crossing. It has plenty of amenities like shelters, wayfinding information. And then you have kind of the spectrum all the way down to, well, first we'll maybe go to C. C in the middle is a mediocre stop. It's in fair to good condition. It's mostly accessible. It may be missing maybe some safe crossing infrastructure. They may be lacking some amenities too, like maybe a shelter or wayfinding information. And then the very end, we have F, which is failing. So this is bus stops in very poor condition. It's probably missing a sidewalk, missing safe crossing infrastructure. It may or may not have a paved boarding area. I don't know if you can see the picture underneath F, but that's a bus stop that is basically engulfed in kudzu, and I don't think the boarding area even exists. It's probably just all kudzu there. So it's lacking a lot of amenities. In terms of what we found within the bus stop census, so the overall grade for the bus stops we surveyed was 71%. We termed this was a C minus. It's not quite failing, but it's very close. It has good room for improvement. In terms of the percent of stops by grade, you'll see in the top chart in blue, there was really half of all the bus stops we surveyed fell into the grade of F. If you think of, wanting to shoot for AB, that was only about 12% of the stops surveyed. When you look at the percent of riders served, it's a little bit different. Fortunately, a lot of the stops that had a grade A or B had more ridership. But still nearly 70% once you add up C and D and F, C and below, that's 70% of the weekly boardings are occurring at stops that have a grade C or below. The remaining 30% are up, grade A and grade B. So there's plenty of room for improvement, plenty of room of shifting those weekly riders from experiencing a grade C and below to a grade A or a B and above. Go to the next slide. So from this report, we had we wanted to specify some recommendations for MARTA for local jurisdictions like the city of Atlanta, and even for neighborhood organizations, community organizations, nonprofits like ourselves, and for individuals on how to improve the state of bus stops. So we came up with 10 recommendations. We grouped them under 3 categories. First one being planning and design, data collection and sharing, and community engagement. We're not going to go through all of them today. We'll just touch on maybe a few of them. Like for planning and design, something we found was, we need to add wayfinding signage, need to improve the wayfinding accessibility at shelters. So we're moving that wayfinding down to the eye level of someone who uses a wheelchair. For data collection and sharing, we thought creating a streamlined funnel for bus stop maintenance requests would be perfect for those who are looking for an easy way to notify the agency of problems that they're experiencing at their bus stop. And then for community engagement, the one that we're going to talk about today is continuing to perform community bus stop censuses. And I think this is most applicable to everyone on the call because we all have our different areas and different problems that are going on. A lot of the recommendations that we have are specific to MARTA and to the Metro Atlanta area, but in terms of performing a bus stop census, anybody can do that. And in terms of why you should do a bus stop census is that I think it's a great way to kind of provide a baseline analysis of the state of bus stops in your community, to be able to compare it over time of how it's improving, or maybe it's declining in its condition. It helps to decide where to prioritize improvements by being able to actually look at the data, look at stories collected from riders, and it creates a sense of ownership among the community. We conducted a community survey with the South River Gardens neighborhood in Atlanta, and we summarized their findings into the infographic that you see on the right. And it was just a really good kind of experience and opportunity to include people of all ages, genders, and ethnicities, and kind of understanding the bus stops and the problems that they face within their own community. So in terms of like conducting this census, it's, we set up our own, website and had special programs that populated the data for us, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. So there's a few different steps you can follow. One is to first just specify the boundaries for the census area. Where are all the bus stops that you want to study? And then decide on the points of data that you want to collect. So for us, we use the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center's toolkit for the assessment of bus stop accessibility and safety. It's a mouthful. We use that report, which has a few bus stop checklists to pick the data features that matter to us the most, and that would be maybe the trade-off between information and the amount of time it takes to survey. That would be useful for us to look at and assess the condition of the bus stops. So you need to specify the boundaries, decide on the data points, and then create a survey form that you could use to go out and actually collect this information. It could be online. There's a lot of online form builder tools, or you could just create a paper survey using Microsoft Word. After you have that, you can organize and train volunteers to come together, have a good understanding of how to answer the questions, have a safety plan, of course, make sure you're wearing maybe a reflective vest if you're actually doing it in person. If you're doing it virtual, you have to train them on how to actually perform the survey online. You'll conduct the census, so take photos, interview riders, take lots of observations, whether it's online or it's in person on the ground. And then once you have all that data, you can analyze it and identify the opportunities for improvement by just looking at some of the metrics that we looked at today, and digging into some of maybe the stories that you've collected from riders, or the photos. I'd understand what would be the best path forward for improving your bus stop. And then once you have identified those opportunities for improvement, you can coordinate with your local jurisdiction, the transit agency, the neighborhood organization, to implement those improvements. And then you just pretty much repeat this every several years to track progress. We're coming up on 2024. We want to do another bus stop census to see how things have changed from 2020 to 2024, and if the efforts of our organization, of our partners, of MARTA, City of Atlanta, and surrounding jurisdictions, they've made a difference in the condition of the bus stop. So that's just a really brief way in terms of how to get started. I see in the comments, do you have a toolkit? Yes, we do. I'll share that in the comments once actually I can probably grab it right now. I'm gonna paste it right now. The toolkit I just sent is like the foundation for this operation. So it has a lot of information about bus stops, and at the end it has a checklist for things to use if you want to survey and perform a census of the bus stops in your community. So that was the recommendations, and now we're going to go into outcomes. And I'll pass it up to Carden to talk about kind of what has come of this census that we've done.
Yeah, so since now coming into 3 years since we conducted the census, we have made a good amount of strides towards improving the bus stops quality in the metro Atlanta area. So one of the things that we've done is raised awareness about bus stop conditions of MARTA, and we actually did a 100-day Twitter campaign where every day we posted a photo from the census data that we collected of the bus stops to just showcase and bring awareness to the conditions, all varying types, ones that were A's, but then some that were F. And it gave a really nice lens into what's going on. We've informed MARTA efforts, both for the bus stop maintenance and our capital projects. So MARTA has a 2040 goal to expand and improve MARTA with many major capital projects. And so we're helping provide feedback and expertise on those projects. Added wheelchair accessible field to the GTFS data, which is really helpful for just understanding the nature of the bus stop. We've informed feedback to MARTA as they're currently doing their bus their bus network redesign, and they're right now redoing the whole network. So it's a couple-year-long project. We've been providing the information from our census data to them so that they understand how to provide the right routes and switch up the stops to maybe some better stops. And then additionally developed knowledge and expertise to really help communities across the Atlanta area become experts at their own stops. And as we go back to the mission of MARTA Army, we're very tactical, and we encourage riders to take advantage of improving their own bus stops that they ride.
You know, I'll add two things onto that. One is I think we underestimated just the short-term gains, because we sent the data over early to MARTA that we were collecting, and there were just the comments that surveyors provided. MARTA would pick up on, like, oh, you know, this stop is missing a sign, let's go fix it. So the MARTA team was actually really good with taking that and then actually sending people out to fit some of those you know, low effort but high impact issues that we were seeing from the surveys. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was number 5 is that it's still happening today. We just had a conversation with a neighborhood in Atlanta who's wanting to improve their bus stops. And the first step for them is we need to know, what's going on at our bus stops. And so we're helping them to conduct a survey with them, following those same steps of outlining the scope, where we want to do the survey, what kind of data we want, and then from there kind of prioritizing how they want to allocate the budget that they have to either providing benches or kind of just redesigning the bus stop itself. So those are just two things I wanted to add about the outcomes.
And then you can get more info on our full report at martaarmy.org/bus-stop census. And this gives you an overview of the bus system and the bus stop responsibilities. It gives you more information around the methodology behind the survey design. So it tackles kind of what we talked about today, but more intricately. And it provides a detailed analysis for each amenity in this presentation. And we also provide detailed maps showing where bus stops are and with each amenity. So that was we took about a year to write the full report, and I believe it's a couple hundred pages, if I remember correctly, Morgan. So I highly recommend, if you want to dive into our data and our methodology, take a look at it. Yeah. And we'll end if you have any questions. And if not, you can connect with us through various channels on the next slide, our Twitter, our Facebook, and our email
Oh my God, thank you so much, Morgan, Carden, my comrades from the MARTA Army. I did want to point out two things before we get into the questions. What this report and what this project really did pull out was two main things to me. And that's, one is the visual proof of the inequity. And I've said many times on calls like this that a lot of these people that work at these transit systems do not ride the system. So they don't see what myself, Morgan, Carden, all of you see at a lot of these stops. So, and COVID was kind of a blessing in disguise because it gave us an opportunity to bring a lot of those visualizations to life. We got pictures of them. A lot of people went out and took pictures of a lot of these stops, and if not, they got Google Earth and Google Satellite visuals, which, if a lot of you know, they update those pretty regularly. So they got to see a lot that was really profound, like that kudzu stop that they showed. That was also on a street that didn't have shoulders. That was in a low-income Black neighborhood, and that's something you don't see north of town, where you have more higher incomes in white neighborhoods. And then the second thing, it provided a total opportunity for collaboration. Because it was COVID, as Carter mentioned, they cut a lot of the routes in half. So you only had certain essential routes. So it provided us an opportunity to show MARTA that this could be an absolute reset of bringing this back together and putting more equity into these bus stops. So, I mean, it really did help us do a lot more collaboration with the transit agency and the communities. We worked with a lot of neighborhoods that only went to virtual. So it was easy for us to go into, because if we wanted to present, people just sent us a Zoom link, and we jumped on and said, hey, we have this wonderful project if you'd like to present. So, you know, it was really easy for us to come in and bring a solution to something that had been plaguing MARTA for years, and especially with something that had a lot more coverage than our rail system. Like, our rail system in Metro Atlanta is only 48 miles, but the bus network went much further, and it spoke much more to an issue, and especially in Clayton County, a majority Black county that just joined MARTA in 2014. And I think only about 8 bus stops had shelters. So it really did bring a lot and drove the point home of why we should focus a lot more on these bus stops, and especially since over half of the people that ride MARTA first started a bus. We want to get to some questions, and then we'll open it up for questions on the chat. So if you, oh, go ahead.
I'm going to say 2 things. One, you had talked about, like, it put in your face the visual of inequity, and to kind of reinforce that, I shared our Flickr page, which has all of the 2,300 or so photos that we've collected all on one page. So you can scroll through there and see the actual conditions of some of these stops. And it's kind of appalling in some places that this is an actually official sanctioned bus stop that is for the transit system, because some of them are really awful. Some of them are good, but some of them are not so good. So I add that link to the chat. And then I think one thing I didn't add on the presentation, but is worth noting, is the lessons learned. Personally, just coming off the project, I think your like data controls, making sure that, especially if it's an online form, that you have the right quality controls in place so that the data submitted is good to go. We had some issues with that and spent a lot of time actually having to clean it up. And that feeds into the next lesson learned, which is you need to be able to make sure you train you need to make sure you have a good core group of trained individuals who would be doing the survey. We crowdsource, so we open it up to everyone, and that also brought in some quality control issues where some people were not answering the questions correctly. And for us, it would have been better maybe to just stick with a core group of people, train them well, and then send them out to survey as many stops as possible. So if you're wanting to do this, you know, that training is important. And then 2, for us, I think the third one is the follow-up, to make sure you have a plan ahead of time of how you want to use these results, and especially that coordination with the transit agency, the local jurisdiction, knowing like where to go from there well in advance will help you to continue that momentum. For us, you know, we kind of had a hard time, and it kind of lost some momentum in the immediate aftermath of it. So those are some lessons learned. I don't know, Carden, if you had the need to add as well.
Yeah, I think from a virtual standpoint, you know, with the virtual aspect, though, the Google Street Map is constantly being updated. Some of them were pictures from like the Google Street hadn't been updated since like 2017 or 2018. And so it's possible that in the 2 years, things have changed in that landscape. So as Marta's alluding to, the quality of it, in person is really nice, but when you have a jurisdiction that is so large as MARTA and expands so much surface area, that in person just wouldn't be scalable by any means. So I think having a combination of both is really important. One thing that I wasn't really able to fully capture is the lighting aspect of it at night and or safety when you're doing virtual. So those were subjective answers as I was, yeah, exactly, Morgan, with over 9,000 bus stops. So the lighting and the safety, it was really hard to do virtually. But again, it's, do you want to, I think it's I think you want to really focus on some of the major amenities, which is like seating and cleanliness and shelter. Lighting and safety can, not that they're not important, but I think for the majority of the use case, you want to have seating. So which amenities are you gonna flux, which one do you want to provide more, you know, rich quality data around it, or are you okay with kind of leaving out those answers?
Absolutely. Well, we're gonna get into the questions, and we'll start with one from the chat from Marie. And it kind of goes into what we just discussed. She asked, in regards to the survey questions, are the questions the same for all responders, or do the subject questions, were they based on the demographic and location answers? And also, did you tackle only a specific group or all groups using different methodologies to collect their answers?
Yeah, so Marie, in regards to survey questions, yes, all the questions were the same for all the responders. It was a single form that had a list of like 20 questions. Some fields were required, some were optional. Do the subjects questions based on demographic and location answers? I assume, are you asking if the questions are specific to demographic and location? We didn't ask any demographic information in our survey. So we didn't say like, is this a predominantly like Black or brown community or low income? We didn't ask any demographic information. This was specifically targeted to the quality of the bus stop and surrounding area. Though I think in our detailed analysis report, we did create maps that had a layer of demographic to showcase the quality of the bus stops and how it correlates to demographics, but no, not in our initial, not in the immediate form collection. And then the location of the bus stops and the routes. During COVID, MARTA reduced the bus routes to the high ridership only. I don't remember the exact number of it, but they significantly cut the number of routes. And we targeted our bus stop census to collect information based on those routes at the time. And then did you tackle only a specific group or all groups using different methodologies to collect their answers? I guess if I understand this question, you're asking who were the surveyors and what types of groups they were. I mean, we put it out to the public, so it was, maybe Morgan, you could talk a little bit more about it, but as far as I know, they would be transit riders of all different demographics, and then even had people that, you know, had never ridden MARTA before, but were interested in getting involved and just surveyed maybe a bus stop or two around their neighborhood.
Right. We had a few methods for trying to find surveyors. One, we would go to the neighborhood meetings, the neighborhood planning units, as they call it in Atlanta. And we'd present on the bus stop census what we're doing and ask if anyone would want to, you know, get together and do it in person or virtual survey of that neighborhood. And then we just really shared it, you know, boosted it on social media too, and targeted like the it to boost in areas where there was a train station or there was a lot of bus ridership. So that was another way that we tried to collect as many, especially bus riders as possible to participate in the survey process.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? If you have a question, feel free to just raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute.
I think Marie, yeah, Marie added a little bit more information regarding others will respond based on their age regarding interest in amenities. Yes, totally. There's going to be a subjective layer into any survey. So the way that we created the actual questions, we're very specific to, does it have a shelter? Yes, no. Is there a crosswalk? Yes, no. So that was factual data, but then we did open a little bit more to subjective questions. We allowed for open comments if anyone wanted to provide any additional information. And then some of the questions like, do you feel safe? That's obviously going to be a very subjective answer based on who you are and where you are.
Any more questions from our audience? Any final questions?
The only question I had, I guess my question is the same, the demographics, where they're the same for the locations. And I think he kind of answered that, but I wanted to see if I can maybe duplicate this here. And I appreciate you sending the links for the toolkits. What was some of the barriers? I know you talked about you had folks that actually went out and did these surveys. Was there a stipend? Did you have a budget? What are we looking at as far as writing a proposal or a grant? Thank you.
That is a great question, Sheila. So kind of how it operated, how we operate as an organization is everything was volunteer. So everything that we presented today and the report was pretty much done on a volunteer basis. There was no stipend or grants that were needed for it. We did, I think, pay for someone to be a graphic designer for the report. In terms of going out to the communities, that was just people who really had cared about bus stops. There was one, the South River Gardens community, they actually reached out to us and wanted us to come along, and we had, a few volunteers who went out and organized it. In terms of getting together a grant, that's not something I have experience with in terms of making a plan, but I would assume it would, the grant has certain requirements and probably of outlining the project, and it would just require kind of outlining the approach, why you're doing it, kind of the information that you're collecting, and especially what I talked about earlier is what you plan to do with it. I think those would be a lot of the important information. But when you're talking about barriers, I guess that is something that would come up, is the technological barriers. So what helped us was the virtual surveying. So being able to set up something that was really easy to do. You go on a map, click on a bus stop, it populates information, you fill it out, and you take a photo on your phone or some other device. So that would be something that would be probably eligible for getting money to create, is that that process. Two is the volunteers. So if you can't find anybody who want to volunteer their time to do it, having a grant cover the stipend or the pay for them to conduct those surveys, good. And at least then you have someone who's going to be doing it. That's their job that they're paid to do is to collect this information. Whereas for us, we just had to rely on people that taking their own time to do it. Which is.
And so the app was free. The software was free. Where did the pictures go? Where were they kept? I'm just curious. How did you?
So we had a Georgia Tech student who volunteered with us, who created a website that linked to a database, so that when you submitted this form on the website, all the information was then uploaded to this database that we could pull the information from, and then the photos and the responses themselves were then sent to our email. It was very much, to be honest, it was kind of thrown together at the last minute. When we launched it, we were still having to correct a few things here and there. So it's not anything that's like official, but it was like the kind of prototype start of how it could be done, of using online form building tools to collect information. And it's not the best response, I admit, but there's certainly tools out there. I know there's survey companies that provide like an online service where you could create your form, even have options to upload attachments, and you can use that those form building tools to then deploy that survey and then use it on maybe a mobile device. Some of them, if you want like a greater storage, required maybe a paid service, which is another opportunity for the grant. Cardin, I feel like you would have some more insight to add to this. Do you have anything to offer?
Regarding data collection and I mean, yeah, we definitely didn't pay any of the surveyors. We had a prize system, and regarding data collection, I believe it all went into like a Google Drive to capture that information.
Mm-hmm.
I'll also add to that, the gamification of the whole project really helped because it allowed people to have something to look forward to. Like, if I collect so many stops, then I'll get this prize. And the prizes were really nice. Like, we had an umbrella, we had t-shirts, we had pins. So they were really something that MARTA also didn't have, because they didn't have like WMATA and MTA and like all these other big systems and stuff things. So these were actually special things that it was transit related that people couldn't get. And also, as far as the data collection, this is a lesson in to utilize student volunteers, because students usually get a lot of software and everything for free. So it really helped because we didn't really have to pay much for it. Like, if you got it free, or if like you have an AARP or like a AAA account, you'd be surprised how many things you can get for free. So yeah, like, it really helped us kind of move this along and incentivize folks where we didn't have to pay them directly.
This is a whole nother workshop, Bakari, on how to connect those dots with your local college, because like I say, what everything you guys saying, I would like to duplicate. I don't want to recreate the wheel. And if there's a workshop or a space we can create for folks that want to partner with some folks, and this is how you do it. And I'm just saying, thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that's really key, as far, and especially if you have a college in your town, utilize these students, because a lot of them are also looking for projects for their grade. Like, we helped a lot of these students out, like with getting a lot of these projects for the coursework that they needed. So yeah, if you got a college campus in your town, use them.
I have a lot of them. What department? Who am I targeting? What,
like any kind of College of Architecture, because that's usually where we got it from in Georgia Tech, like, because they'll either have like an urban planning program or something like that. But just any kind of program that relates to transit, to where it could fit in, like urban planning or any kind of public policy program. Like those are perfect spots to look for student activities.
And
thank you, sir.
technically, like in terms of like the technical aspect of the survey, maybe like a computer programming or computer science students who are well versed in technology. It's not the cheapest way to do it. I think, besides doing just a paper survey, is to use the Google Forms. Currently, they're free, and it uploads to a spreadsheet already. You can store some of those photos in Google Drive if you're actually attaching it. I think there may be some size limitations, but it's all about kind of exploring your options. What is your budget? Could you pay for kind of a survey service that offers more functionality, or is something that's going to be low fidelity, easy to use, it's free, but may not have all the functions that you want. That's when you're actually setting up and planning for the census. Those are kind of things to talk about and assess before deciding on the actual like mode of data collection that you want to go with.
Any other questions?
I will say if anyone's interested, we'd be certainly happy to kind of jump on a call and kind of talk through some of those options or help research what is available now, because it certainly changed from 2020 to 2023 in terms of what is available to use. I think MARTA Army, since we're gearing up to maybe do it again in 2024, is also going to be going through that same process as well, so we can learn together.
Absolutely. Any other questions or thoughts? Going once, going twice. Well, if nothing else, I will stop this recording. Morgan Carden, thank you so much for presenting to us today. And best luck. I can't even say this because I'm joining you all, but yes, we hope this goes further, and we'd love to see the progress with this. So thank you so much.
Bye, all.
Thank you, Bakari. Thank you all.
Thank you.